Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, the last election of the year, pushed back by Ida, will be held this Saturday, settling a contentious sheriff's showdown, a controversial St. Tammany gaming resort proposal, and some Orleans Parish Council and clerk runoffs. Fortunately, we will soon have the holidays to get our minds off of politics, though there are still lingering tensions about school vaccine mandates. Joining us to discuss these issues are our Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Jessica Williams, Deputy Investigations Editor, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Joining us for the first time, Roby Chavez, correspondent for PBS NewsHour, and also Ben Myers, who is a reporter with the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go over to Jessica to get us going first because, boy, it's a hotly contested runoff for Orleans Parish Sheriff.
It is, and in this race you really see a candidate who has described herself as a progressive really take on a candidate that is seen as being a part of the political establishment that has a very long track record that the progressive candidate Susan Hudson has been able to eat into over the course of the past few weeks leading into the runoff. Susan has a platform that is really considered to be very forward thinking, really advocating things that we haven't seen happen in New Orleans. She wants to end the recording of phone calls between attorneys and their incarcerated clients. She wants a new health care provider for the jail. She says that that organization has not performed up to snuff at all in the time that it has been employed. She wants inmates who do not identify as being either male or female, or who identify as being a different sex than they were assigned at birth, to be housed with other people who were born in that sex. She's very progressive, and this platform has really attracted the attention of a lot of national donors. There's a lot of money being poured into this race, and you didn't see so much of it in the primary, but leading into the runoff, even just this week, Mark Zuckerberg contributed over $200,000 to her campaign. And on the flip side, Sheriff Gusman is really running on a platform of, the steady hand, someone who is committed to continuing the practices that he put into place when he was first elected in 2004. He stands by his record. There have been some blemishes on that record, however, over the course of his tenure, the jail, the actual control of the jail, he actually had to relinquish that to a federal administrator. And he has sort of cast that as, just a bump in the road, but is really sort of casting his re-election, or making the case for his re-election as someone, he would be someone that would continue some of the practices that have been put under the jail's consent decree. Right. And he would be someone that would not be as forward-thinking as Ms. Hudson would be. And that's really what he has cast his whole runoff campaign around.
Of course, the issue of the criminal justice, social justice reform is something that has helped propel Jason Williams into the DA office. And so Susan Hudson is getting a lot of support from these progressives in that movement. And one thing that Marlon Gusman has certainly been eager to talk about is all this money that's moving in to support her race from out-of-state groups or entities or people.
He has. He said New Orleans residents will not be bought. That's one of the things that, he has said in response to a lot of the support that she's received. And it's interesting because it actually flipped. In the primary, it was Marlon Gusman that was raising the most money, Marlon Gusman that received the most endorsements locally, and Marlon Gusman that was seen as sort of the front runner in that race, and obviously who led that field. And now moving into the runoff, a lot of the support, if not locally, certainly nationally, has coalesced around Susan Hudson. And it's interesting because when you talk to Marlon, and he says, when you ask him, do you consider yourself to be a progressive sheriff? He says, I have a responsibility not only to, the people who are in the jail, who are incarcerated, to make sure that they are constitutionally protected and they have their needs met, but to the victims of the families, the reasons why they're put in jail in the first place. It's not necessarily my job to let people out of the jail. That's a judge's job. I'm just, basically a caretaker, in other words, whereas Susan's platform is very big and broad, uses a lot of, platitudes and speaks to a lot of people's personal feelings about how the jail is run, about why people are incarcerated, how long they should be incarcerated. And that message is really, speaking to a lot of these progressive groups around the country that have lined up to support her campaign.
Of course, the consent decree is an issue, but also so is another building, really, to house patients who are in need of mental health, the behavioral health assistance. And Gusman supports this, of building another building. Susan Hudson does not. That is a real big bone of contention.
That is a real big bone of contention, and it's something that, mayoral administration after mayoral administration has weighed in on over the time that Marlin Gusman has been in office. The current mayor's administration has actually fought not for more beds at the jail, to right-size the jail that we have, and Sheriff Gusman has, of course, fought for more resources to be sent to the jail, more folks to be incarcerated in a bigger building. And that's an issue that at least there is some alignment between the current mayor and the Marlin's challenger, Susan, on. Now, we'll see whether or not voters feel the same way on Saturday, but it is one other line of demarcation between the two candidates.
So we'll see who gets their forces out there to vote.
That's right, and turnout, was very low last election, and I think this time it'll really depend on, who is able to turn out their people to vote for their candidate.
All righty, Jessica, thanks a lot. We'll be looking forward to tomorrow night. Errol, let's go on over to you now. In St. Tammany Parish, a really big burning issue, too.
Let me tell you what it's not, first of all, because I think a lot of people are confused about this. It is not another example of a riverboat from somewhere else being moved to this location. That's happened a few times since gambling started. It happened, if you remember, when dockside gambling first started, riverboat gambling, there was a Stars and Stripes casino out by the lakefront in New Orleans, and that was eventually, didn't do well, and that was eventually moved, I think it was to Lake Charles. So there have been a couple of examples of that, and indeed, you couldn't have gambling other than casino gamblers, other than along dockside. Since then, the laws have been changed. And so what's that question? Is a gambling license. And there's a group out of Bossier, there's a group called Peninsula Pacific that has a boat called Diamond Jacks, which has been closed, and they haven't reopened by the governor's rule. I mean, none of the boats that were closed since COVID have reopened. And they want to move their license. They want to move their license to be able to do something else. And so that's what this is about. So if they can move their license, and their choice is to move it to St. Tammany, because their studies show the area by Slidell would be a good place to build a hotel, to build a resort. You've got that whole Orleans Parish traffic and Mississippi. And so that's the question. And the question is, can they move the license? And then doing that, can they build a resort? It is a question that is only one item on the ballot. If you look at the one item, it's a long item, okay? A lot of words to it. But a lot of thought went into the wording that spells out every detail, and then at the end the voter decides yes or no on this. And so if they pass, then the license is transferred here, and then the company says, well, with that license, we're going to build a land-based casino. So there'll be a land-based casino. Then with the land-based casino, we'll also build a resort. They say a four-star hotel, restaurants, and all those sorts of things that go with resorts. Meanwhile, the gambling boat in Bossier City, the Diamond Jack, will just be an empty gambling boat, and they don't know what to do with it. They might just give it away or sell it or something, but that's not what's going to come here. That won't be here. So it's a question of to be able to transfer the license to build this resort or to not be able to do that. I'll say one thing, the term resorts used kind of loosely. There aren't many, if or any, really major resorts in Louisiana. There are several places that call themselves a resort. You might have a casino in one place and a relationship with a golf course in another place, and they say, well, we're a resort. But in terms of a real under, one roof type of resort, we really haven't had anything like that. And so it would be something sort of new to the area. There's been accusations that the Mississippi gambling industry has been campaigning against this. There have been a lot of campaigns. And apparently it's true. Last week on the show, we had Susan Pagonis, who covers...
Sarah.
I'm sorry, Sarah Pagonis, who covers St. Tammany for The Advocate. And she asked one of the casino operators on the golf course if that's true. Have you all been putting money into this? And he said, yeah, but not too much because we don't think it's going to pass anyway. But it's obviously that this is of high interest to the Mississippi Gulf interest, not to have people heading to the Gulf Coast diverted by Slidell on the way.
It's high interest in St. Tammany, too, because there are those that are for, there are those that are against, and we've seen a flood of ads about that.
Yeah, and the big question is how will the money be divided? Will all this money go into Slidell or where? And if the assurances, I mean, you can look it up that it's being divided throughout the parish and throughout the different jurisdictions.
Okay, all righty, E. Thanks a lot. Ben, let's go on over to you because in Orleans Parish there are some council runoffs, and you are going to tell us about districts D and C.
Sure. Well, first of all, both District C and District D lack incumbents because the current office holders, Kristen Giselson Palmer in District C and Jared Brosette in District D, ran unsuccessfully in the at-large race that J.P. Morrell won. So they were wide open primaries. There were combined 21 candidates between both districts, and in both districts you have generational differences. There's 30-something candidates running against 60-something candidates. In District C, the 30-something candidate is the one with a lot of the kind of heavy-hitter political endorsement support. That would be Freddie King. He's a lawyer, and he's facing Stephanie Bridges, also a lawyer. Both have City Hall experience. Mr. King served as the Constituent Services Director in that very council district under former council member Nadine Ramsey. Ms. Bridges served as an assistant city attorney under both the Nagin and Landry administrations. District D is a pretty fascinating race. I kind of think of it as a classic challenge between young and older. Both candidates tend to exhibit different ideologies, particularly around public safety. Eugene Green, who is the older candidate, also a political veteran. He's served in Mark Morial's administration, also served as chief of staff to former Congressman William Jefferson. He has made public safety, even though it's kind of a tangential issue for the council, he's made public safety the cornerstone of his campaign. And his primary talking point on that subject is to change the narrative. He thinks that the narrative has shifted too far in the direction of a progressive platform that favors, for example, rehabilitating former inmates. Whereas his opponent, Troy Glover, actually runs a nonprofit focusing on people who have just been released from jail and putting them to work. And he talks a lot about the need to cut down on recidivism. So Mr. Green wants to shift the narrative back to victims and wants to increase resources for victims. Mr. Glover, who, by the way, will make it a point to say that his own father was murdered on his doorstep when he was 1 year old, so he knows about being victimized in that sense. But he is passionate about reducing recidivism through rehabilitation. So those are the two. Those are C and D.
Okay, and right now we're going to move over to Jessica. Now she's going to pick up with the runoffs in B and E.
That's right. We've got in District B, which covers Central City, parts of the Warehouse District, and some other parts downtown. We've got incumbent Jay Banks that is going up against an attorney, Leslie Harris. And this race has really emerged as one of the most interesting and sort of exciting of the council elections, just because of the ferocity in which these two candidates have, sort of gone at each other. Jay Banks is someone who is a former King Zulu, who is affiliated with the Black Organization for Leadership Development, one of the more prominent political organizations in the city, and has really been a reliable ally on the council of Mayor LaToya Cantrell, and particularly has brought forth several issues related to creating more affordable housing in the city. But even with that track record, Ms. Harris, who has amassed quite a following of her own, has accused Mr. Banks of being sort of a do-nothing council member, someone who is more more concerned with, preserving his political fiefdom, so to speak, as opposed to actually advocating on behalf of residents. Of course, Mr. Banks denies this. This is something that we've seen play out over the course of the last week, in which they really have attacked each other pretty heavily. There was even, an accusation that Ms. Harris had faked her grandmother's sweet potato casserole, and that is, another reason why she is fraudulent and we should not vote for her. But anyway, that was some of the things that have been mentioned. But that race is predicted to be, I would say, pretty close. If you look at that district over the last 4 years, and really with the previous time that Mr. Banks was elected, it was really down to the number of 100 votes. There was like maybe 100 vote difference between he and his opponent, and we may very well see that close margin again on Saturday.
Okay.
Moving over to District E, we've got an incumbent in that race as well, Cindy Nguyen, who is going up against a former council member, Oliver Thomas. In the primary, that was the only race where the incumbent did not get a majority of the vote moving in to the runoff. It was Oliver Thomas that, in fact, was actually gathering more of the vote than Ms. Nguyen did. And there's a lot of frustration in that district. That is a district that covers New Orleans East and the lower 9th Ward. And a lot of folks feel that, there should have been more done by city council members and the mayor to incite more private development in that area. And of course, now we're seeing the effects of that with so much public support being thrown around a challenger as opposed to an incumbent. So time will tell. We will see what will happen on Saturday with both of those races. But in both cases, these are incumbents that are having to fight for dear life for their seat.
Really, some hotly contested races there in Orleans Parish, but still, turnout is not expected to be that big.
Not at all. If we look at the primary, the numbers for turnout were relatively low. And then when we examine even early voting for the general, 16 to 18%, just not very strong at all. And with there not being a high-profile runoff, in a mayor's race on the ballot, that could mean that more folks stay home. But again, it could be the same thing, like I said, for the sheriff earlier. Which of these two organizations or supporters of, Banks or Harris or Nguyen or Thomas can get their folks to turn out? And that's really what it's going to depend on.
That's the key, turnout. All righty, thanks a lot, Jessica. Robbie, let's go on over to you, and we're happy to have you here. You are a correspondent for PBS NewsHour, which of course is PBS. Folks can watch it here on Channel 12. So it's a delight having you here, and you're going to talk about, hopefully we'd like to say politics aside now, but not really. Governor Edwards is proposing a mandate for COVID-19 vaccination for school kids. Opposition to that.
Well, look, there was another political showdown at the Louisiana State Capitol in Baton Rouge today. Republican lawmakers faced off with the governor's proposal for these vaccine mandates. I thought we'd break down what that proposal is. Basically, it is being proposed by the Louisiana Department of Health for some public school students. What they would do would require that students who got their vaccinations need to get a COVID vaccine along with all the other immunizations in them. The Louisiana Department of Health says that the risk is significant and that this proposal is necessary. I should say that this, at this point, would only apply to people who are 16 years and older. That's because that's the only group that's been approved by the FDA. But certainly a lot of debate this week at the state capitol about this issue.
And so what the governor is proposing is, as you said, 16 and older, and it would be with the start of the next school year. Now, parents would have the opportunity to opt out of it, would they not?
Right. So one of the things about Louisiana is very broad exemptions. So parents are allowed to opt out if they prefer, and they can opt out for religious reasons, medical reasons. They can opt out just simply for philosophical reasons. And that's pretty easy to do. You just download a form on the website and you would turn that into the school. Even though there is the opt-out, there was a lot of debate, 7.5 hours of debate at the Capitol this week, both from parents. Some students took off of school. The discussion from parents and kids went from my mom and dad should be able to tell me whether or not I get the vaccine. Some parents went as far as calling it tyranny, but a lot of the opposition came from Republican lawmakers, even the Speaker of the House, who said that this was an overreach. Dr. Joe Cantor Director with the Louisiana Department of Health, also spoke trying to get some of the facts out there. He did make clear to folks that no one will be forced to take this vaccine if they didn't want to. But he also pointed out just how important it was to get. There was a lot of misinformation that was given at this hearing. It went before a government oversight committee. They ultimately rejected this proposal from the governor, voted 13-2, and tried to shut this proposal down. The governor has hinted that he wants to move forward with this, that if it goes in place, it would start in the fall. But keep in mind, Attorney General Jeff Landry also testified before that committee. He said that this proposal just had no merit. So we can expect that this very likely will move from the debate at the Capitol to the courtroom.
And Jeff Landry also brought along noted anti-vaxxer, someone who's been very vocal about not just this vaccine, but other vaccines too.
He did, and you know, Dr. Joe Cantor talked very clearly about this issue of misinformation and says that it's costing lives. After the testimony ended, he even put out a pretty strong tweet calling out the anti-vaxxers for putting what he called dangerous and reckless information out there. Keep in mind, if Louisiana does go ahead and put these vaccine requirements for public school students in place, they would be the second state. Louisiana will join California. And you know, one of the other issues is that you want to kind of look at where this opposition is coming from. And so we took a look at some of the numbers, and you can see that the state continues to not fully embrace this vaccine. Across the state, only 49% of folks are fully vaccinated. Some parts of the state, that number is as low as 36%.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of work to do on the part of health officials if they're going to push this proposal forward.
And of course, now children can be vaccinated, but there's only like 3% or so of kids statewide that have been, or maybe a little bit more than that. Not many, put it that way, have received that vaccination.
Yeah, and we've heard some health officials speak out. Dr. Mark Klein, who's the medical director over at Children's Hospital here in New Orleans, wrote an op-ed in The Advocate being very clear that we need more vaccines for kids out there. This will save lives, and that the risk is very clear to the kids. As far as that new group that was approved for vaccines, the ages 5 to 11, as you mentioned, we're way behind the rest of the country, which is vaccinated about 7% in that age group. Louisiana is less than 3%.
Okay, well, we're undoubtedly going to see continuing argument over this, so thanks a lot, Robbie.
Absolutely.
All righty, Ben, let's go on back over to you to wrap up and touch on a little bit more about the elections in Orleans Parish, really. There's some millages up for renewal. Why don't you tell us about those?
Sure. So there's two millages. Both are for 20-year renewals. Excuse me. One is for the public library system. This would bring in about $11 million if it's assessed at the level that the library recommends. It could go up to 4 mills, which would bring in $17 million, but the library says that it only needs 2.58, which is about 11, or about half its operating budget. Excuse me. The other one is for housing. This one is relatively small compared to other property taxes in the city. It's 0.91 mills, brings in about $4 million a year. It garnered some opposition from the Bureau of Governmental Research, which is the good government watchdog in the city. The Cantrell administration and some of the advocates took some issue with their opposition to it, especially the advocates. They say that the Bureau of Governmental Research has no standing when it comes to housing. They say that there's a long track record there of a bias against paying for housing with public funds. And they say that the tax is actually very necessary and a critical resource to, especially when it comes to responding to emergencies like COVID or Hurricane Ida. Part of the opposition from the BGR was that they were saying the Cantrell administration has not done a good enough job of accounting for it or coming up with spending plans. But I think the advocates will say that you need flexibility with how you spend this, particularly when it comes to responding to emergencies.
Because this millage has been in place. This is a renewal now. So this fund has had the money for over these many years. So the Cantrell administration says it's needed to continue. Yeah,
it's already been in place since 1991, and it's paid for a variety of things. Most recently, you saw after Hurricane Ida, it helped with homeowner insurance deductibles. That was a program that the administration was able to tap the tax funds for. It also helped with rental assistance as soon as COVID hit and months before federal assistance was available for that. And it also helps with affordable housing development. Right. Okay, we'll see where that goes. And also clerk's race. Jessica, you were going to touch on that?
That's right. In the clerk's race, you have two folks who used to handle small claims cases on both the East and the West Bank that are now both seeking to replace Arthur Morrell, who had been in the clerk of criminal court seat for quite some time. Their platforms are very similar. Both say that they want to modernize the clerk of criminal court office. But they both differ on whether or not Morrell has done a good job. Darren Laborde has actually gotten Mr. Morrell's endorsement and has been touting that in his public forums that he's done on why he deserves the opportunity for the office, whereas Austin Badon, who is the other candidate in that race, is very much taking an anti-Morrell position. But that is another race that is going to be on the ballot on Saturday, and voters will decide one way or the other which candidate to select.
Clerk of Criminal District Court, right? All righty.
Right.
All right. Other stories. E, let's start with you.
Well, first, whenever there's a clerk's race, there's always one issue, modernization. I mean, there's no social issues in the clerk's race. That's what they talk about. But I want to mention, there are so many bowl games now that it's hard to keep track of who's coming to town. But next week is the New Orleans Bowl, and that's ULL in Lafayette versus Marshall. And then the Sugar Bowl on January 1st is Baylor versus Ole Miss. ULL has been to the New Orleans Bowl so many times, they should change the name to the I-10 Bowl because it's the standard route. So.
Okay, Jessica, over to you.
On Sunday, we will see Alvin Kamara back on the field. I, for one, am excited about that, and hopefully we can break our 5-game losing streak.
I know, and I hope everybody stays healthy. Robbie, over to you.
Look, at the PBS NewsHour, we're looking forward to what's going to happen at the Supreme Court with these abortion cases from Texas and in Mississippi. We're visiting some of the clinics to see the impact there and visiting with both sides of the debate to kind of see where they think this is going.
Okay, we'll be looking for that. 6 o'clock, WYES is PBS NewsHour. Okay, Ben, wrap it up.
Short-term rental enforcement is going to be a huge issue next year. It already is, but watching the new council candidates deal with the Cantrell administration on that issue is going to be very interesting to watch.
All righty, guys. I thank you all for being here. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.